Wonderful. Thank you, Brianna. And like Brianna indicated, I'm Alexander. Unless you didn't already know, I'm the Dean of the Embry-Riddle Worldwide College of Arts and Sciences. And I thank you for joining us and our esteemed guest for another um, occurrence on fresh perspectives on a broad range of topics related to resilience that we address in this series, where we really focus on efforts to foster the vision of achieving whole community resilience, individually, socially, organizationally, um, locally, nationally, internationally, and globally. It's very important in our educational mission, where our globally distributed online programs, among other things, include a Master of Science in Human Security and Resilience. Just as an example. We are consciously not fostering any particular definition of resilience, of the concept of resilience. There's ecology where it originated. There is obviously psychological concepts, social. There's, the National Preparedness Framework out of the Department of Homeland Security that defines resilience also. And but we actually work to recognize and fuse perspectives. So that this Dean's Virtual Speaker Series also contributes to fostering our vision as the Embry-Riddle Worldwide College of Arts and Sciences to be a destination college for multidisciplinary studies and impactful collaborative research, as well as continue to be a national leader in general education, developing opportunities for a diverse student population to fulfill their educational goals and become responsive, responsible, global citizens. And resilience is a global citizen responsibility. It's not only something for big organizations, industry, although it's very important there as well. But today, very special topic and also a very special delivery of the series. So the topic is resilience strategies for institutions of higher education, techniques for self-care and compassion fatigue prevention. This occurrence is very special because this occurrence of Resilience Reimagined is brought to you in collaboration with the Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools, REMS or REMS, Technical Assistance Center of the US Department of Education. We are very proud and grateful to have as our distinguished speaker today, Marleen Wong, the Senior Vice Dean. She served as Senior Vice Dean of the David Lawrence Stein and Violet Goldberg Sachs Endowed Professorship of Mental Health at the Suzanne Dworak Peck School of Social Work at the University of Southern California. Very nice. We have a campus location in Southern California, among others, in San Diego. So it's always nice to be over there. So that's great. But more importantly, back to our distinguished speaker, Marleen. She was previously the director of mental health, crisis teams, and suicide prevention programs at the Los Angeles Unified School District. She has expertise in the development of K through 12 crisis intervention policies, procedures, and interventions since 1974. The concept of resilience by Holling was first published, I believe, in 1973. So that's a nice time-wise connection, I think. Dr. Wong has been engaged in a community-based research partnership with Rand Health and the UCLA Partnered Health Research Center for over 20 years, and serves as the principal investigator for the National Center for Traumatic Stress Networks Trauma Treatment Adaptation Center for Resilience, Hope, and Wellness in Schools. Currently, she is focused on dissemination of information and resources to school districts across the US and Canada, focused on trauma-informed schools. Crisis intervention, threat, and assessment programs are her focus, including assisting schools to develop immediate and long-term COVID-19 recovery strategies. She has also been identified as one of the preeminent experts in school crisis and disaster recovery by the White House and as the architect of school safety programs by the Wall Street Journal. Dr. Wong has been an invited speaker and panelist at several White House summits on school safety during different administrations. I know that Marleen is very interested in also, along with her presentation or after her presentation, getting the conversation going. So as always, may I suggest that we reserve some time towards the end of the hour that we set aside for this series. For each occurrence, we reserve some time for Q&A, but also I would encourage you, as always, our attendees here, if you have any questions or anything comes to mind, as Marleen is going to be presenting. If you just drop that in the chat, so we can also absorb that along the way. With that, without further ado, welcome, Dr. Wong. Thank you so much for having agreed to speak to us. We are very much looking forward to this occurrence here with you. Thank you. Please take it away.
Well, thank you so much for that kind invitation, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm just hoping here that we are able to spend time together, and the other part of it is I would really enjoy hearing from you on the chat. My colleagues at the U.S. Department of Education, REMS, Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools, the Technical Assistance Center, will be looking at the chat. They'll be monitoring it so that if there are some questions related to a specific, at a specific point in my presentation, they're going to stop me so that we can pay attention to your questions and your comments, which I welcome very much. So I am a trainer for REMS, as you see on the top. And I often have presented this to people who work directly with students, people in HR, people who are faculty, and deal with a number of students. I know in the university, and as in my role as an administrative dean, we often don't think of what our students might come to class with, but we certainly know when they reach a certain critical point or crisis in their lives. And then we begin to look at what it is that they're confronting. And here's where the whole idea of building resilience, not only within our students, but within ourselves, because this is a world, as we know in recent events, that is fraught with conflict and danger. So we have some objectives here. And I just want to say that each of these is important. And the first is, of course, engaging and using that chat, because often we don't have, enough time to really talk with together. And that's what I love in person conversations, because I get to see you and you get to see me, and I get to see how you're reacting to something, puzzled about something, disagreeing with something. And all of that is part of the dialogue that is so important in higher education. The objective is also perhaps to learn about the interconnectedness of resilient factors, and an introduction to a strategy to provide you with knowledge and skills with how to interact. What do you say when a student comes to you with a personal problem? And how do you talk? How do you begin that conversation? The other is to assess your wellness. One of the wonderful slides that you know, it is not in this particular presentation, but it's in the longer presentation, is that when we work with students who bring with them a number of life experiences, and the percentage of students who come to four-year colleges and universities like yours and like mine, every single one of them. And these rates might vary from university to university, but it used to be 20%. When I started as an administrative dean back in 2008, it was 20%. And today, with another generation of students, it's 30%. And so we have to think about, how does this impact us? Because the world and the generation of students that we're dealing with are completely different from that 10 years ago. And, some people say a generation is 20 years. Well, 20 years ago, this was definitely a different world. And it was, just the beginning of social media. And we all know the impact of that there are now 200, at least K-12 schools that are suing all the social media quote unquote giants because they have impacted in the most negative way the mental health of students. And that is something that is expanding as a point of view in all K-12 schools. But most importantly to me is that you may all be far more expert in these areas of, resilience or in dealing with crises with students. But this is really a time to reflect. It's your time. The lovely thing about being online is that, this is your time. You can have some lunch. If you haven't had lunch, you can drink a cup of coffee. You can get up, you can walk around. Hopefully, you'll still be on listening to my voice. But it's a time to really reflect on how this information, how you experience this, or maybe you don't experience it. And the other thing I would encourage you to do is please put your comments in, your personal experiences with this, because I really believe that when there is a webinar, a seminar, a lecture, that up to 50% of the learning can be from the people who are participants, because you can do so much reading a book. When I was first a parent, when I had babies, I read every book there ever was. But there was nothing more value to me than hearing from people who had gone through that experience as mothers, as fathers. And I value that lived experience so much. So please, please, I encourage you to, use that chat box. So here's what we're going to talk about in the next hour. And we will have a hard stop because I know all of you have a busy schedule. So what we're going to talk about are some of the unique aspects of the higher education culture. We're going to also talk about trauma and resilience when crises occur. How are they related? The second is, I said, the model of psychological first aid, listen, protect, connect. The third module are the dimensions of compassion fatigue. And some of you, as I said, may be more expert in these areas. There are various other words and terms that are used, but we're going to focus on compassion fatigue. And the fourth is building a self-care plan. And often we don't do enough to care for ourselves. And, mental health, physical health, spiritual health, and I'm not just talking about religion, but I'm talking about our understanding of whether we believe in a higher power or whether we think about this in a universal way about our self, our being at one with nature. Certainly that is true here in Hawaii. And that Hawaiians very much believe in the Aina, AINA, you can look it up, and it's our relationship to the land and also our relationship with our families. It's the core of spirituality in Hawaiian culture. So we're going to talk a little bit here about core beliefs. This is our second module. And just think about this. There are times when we feel like the world is a safe place, that all's well with the world. When we're in that space, we feel like, I can trust other people, that the majority of people in this world are good people, and that I am competent to be able to navigate whatever challenges come up every day. However, there can be situations in which events seriously compromise our sense that the world is a safe place. So at a global level, we have the Israeli-Hamas war, and I respect all perspectives on this, but I just want to say that, innocent people have been killed on both sides of the equation. And how do we achieve peace? And also, my children are older. They're not, if this conflict grows to a global level, then there'll be young men and women in our country who may be called to serve in that regard, or who may themselves feel that they must serve. And then our hearts and our minds are taken to another place. So I don't want to, I know this sounds trite to you maybe, but I want to talk about the Kansas City Chiefs Parade. You know, because I am also an alum of USC, and Caleb Williams is the number one, he's going to be selected possibly by the Bears. I am a football person, and I've watched every game of the Chiefs for the last 5 years since Patrick Mahomes came onto the scene. I'm pre Taylor Swift. And so I was looking forward to the parade as with a sense of joy, in acknowledgement of, these amazing elite athletes and the leadership and the joy that must have been felt by the people right there in Kansas City, and the joy that I was going to share with them for all sorts of reasons. And then the mass shooting took place. And I felt like we were robbed of just a moment of joy. So not only on Valentine's Day, the day of the parade, it was also the 6th anniversary of the massacre in Parkland at Marjorie Stoneham Douglas High School. It was also Ash Wednesday for those of you who, observe that religious ritual. And it changed. I mean, and 9 children were shot. One person was killed. A total of they say they changes from 21 to 22 people were shot. And it was because of gun violence. So now I certainly think differently about going to a sporting event. I think differently about going to a concert. I've also been one of the first psychological responders to and was a consultant to the Las Vegas. Well, it's actually the Clark County school district after the shooting, the mass shooting in Las Vegas at that concert, and at many, many others. And I'll tell you, we're still dealing with this. And one of the things that was said during First Take, I don't know if any of you watched that program, I watch it every morning. And one of the commentators said, I don't know how we're going to change this because, quote unquote, this violence is part of our country. So this really speaks to our core beliefs and how we all struggle in our own individual way with how we're going to deal with this. So, what is a crisis? There may have been a crisis on your campus. Here's the thing. People always say, oh, actually, if you look at the statistics, there are very few mass shootings. But that's because the definition of mass shootings is 4 people have to die. So there's many other shootings in which one person died, or maybe nobody died, but a whole bunch of folks were shot and injured. And we look at the National Center for Education Statistics, and in 1 year, over 77% of K-12 schools experienced one act of violence in their schools. Could have been weapon violence. It could have been a child that was beaten, hit, kicked, punched, threatened with a gun or a knife. So we have to look at the climate of our culture, the climate of our schools. And that's why we're talking about trauma. I think some folks feel, well, we don't have to talk about this, but because it didn't affect our school. But we really have to look at the numbers. I don't know, there's over 300 million people in the United States, men, women, children. There's over 400 million guns. If we just look at how many cars there are in the United States and how many accidents there are, we are living in an environment that is an environment that could potentially be seen as one of danger and threat. But it may actually come closer to home and become a crisis in our school or community. And what happens is our coping mechanisms are challenged. All of a sudden, we don't feel safe. And we question, what should we do? What's going to happen next? It poses a threat to our safety. It has the power to disrupt the day, and especially in institutions of both higher learning and K-12 schools. Because when these things happen, students, no matter what age, don't return to school campuses. I've been to many, many school shootings, and as the director of mental health and crisis intervention at LA Unified School District, where there were 750,000 students when I was director, and 1,000 schools. There were almost 2,500 to 3,000 crisis incidents in one of those schools because it was over 700 square miles. LA Unified School District at that time was the city of Los Angeles and 26 other municipalities. So this can have a broad impact within a university setting because it could be, it could be something that threatens the ability of students to feel safe coming to school. Or if it has impacted the campus, what's going to happen? A shooter that it doesn't start on the campus, but it ends on the campus. So a crime that occurs in the community and the perpetrator runs onto the campus because the campus is an open space. This also causes stress, fear, post-traumatic stress. It doesn't necessarily cause PTSD, but there may be subclinical symptoms that people experience. And it can also, what we know now, is it can reawaken childhood traumas because a trauma in the present has ripples to the past. It's brain research that shows us that it opens up other experiences in our memory, and we begin to relive those even if they had been something we hadn't thought about for many years. So what is trauma? And you can read here the emotions that can come up around physical well-being, mental well-being, cognitive well-being, but basically it also leaves us, feeling for a moment at least helpless and fearful of what's to come, because there's always a fear of recurrence that that arises when we think about this. But I want to take a moment to read the definition of trauma from someone who wrote about it. In her book, Trauma Sensitive Schools, the author, Susan Craig, says that the events are not traumatic in and of themselves, but they become traumatic when they exceed a person's capacity to cope. So my colleagues at RAND and I did a large-scale survey, and we discovered that in the 700 miles of LA Unified School District, there were certain school districts, certain zip codes that had higher levels of exposure to violence than others. And we looked at it zip code by zip code rather than school by school. And you wouldn't be surprised, I don't know how many of you have been to Los Angeles, that in the zip codes of highest crime, gang activity, substance use and abuse, drug sales, poverty, and also, excuse me, people who had high levels of adverse childhood experiences. So in those areas were East LA and South LA, once known as South Central LA, that we asked every single sixth grader, these are kids that are 11 years old, have you been hit, kicked, punched, are threatened with a gun or knife. And every single sixth grader was over 33,000 children. And we received their individual responses. 27,000 responded to our survey. And we found that there were great differences and disparities of violence exposure across the district, the 700 miles. But in the zip codes of East LA and South Central LA, 88 to 92% of 11-year-olds said, yes, in the community, I have been hit, kicked, punched, or threatened with a gun or a knife. And I think what resonates with author Craig's statement that you don't necessarily get PTSD. So 100% of these kids that have been hit, kicked, punched, threatened with a gun or knife, 27% of them had clinical levels of PTSD. Now, and I don't want to minimize that because that's a very high level. If 27% of a community of children in certain zip codes had cancer, you would begin to look at environmental factors. And of course, guns now and gun violence or just violence in general are part of the social determinants of health. And I don't know, I think that the second part of it is from the second quote is from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. And what is written by this network is of whom I am a member and have been a member since 2001. And that's a great resource if you want to go online. It's NCTSN, National Child Traumatic Stress Network. You can go on their website. It's tons of information. But the definition here of child trauma is children who suffer from child traumatic stress are those who have been exposed to one or more traumas over the course of their lives and develop reactions that persist and affect their daily lives even after the events have ended. Adverse childhood experiences study. This is very much being discussed right now, and I encourage you to look up ACEs, the ACEs study. It was conducted by Dr. Felitti in the Kaiser Permanente Hospital in La Jolla, California. And if any of you have been to the San Diego, you have a campus in San Diego. So you know La Jolla is just north of San Diego, high rent district. I mean, it's beyond upper middle class. I mean, to say it's upper middle class is an understatement. And so it was done mainly with adults, Caucasian adults, and Dr. Felitti, and I'm just going to give you, you can read a great deal more about the study itself, but I worked with Dr. Felitti and had the honor of speaking with him on several occasions. And I asked him, I said, what was the thing that really prompted you to do this? Because certainly adverse childhood experiences and trauma is not something I associate with La Jolla. And he said, I was working with this young woman and she was quite beautiful. And she came to me and she said, I need your help. She was obese. And she had been struggling with this since she was an adolescent. And he said, she was a teacher, and she said, I don't think I can live a full life. I want to be married. I want to have a family. And I don't feel good about myself. It's like even when somebody asks me for a date, I always feel so inadequate. And he said, I am going to work with you. We're going to work hard together. And he did that. So for over a year, they worked on a diet and, approaches to, when do you have cravings and how can you stop that? And how can you buy the correct food? She worked with a nutritionist. I mean, he said at the end of the year, he was so proud because she lost 100 pounds. and he considered it a success story. And a year later, she came back. And what do you think was happening with her then? Common story. She not only regained the 100 pounds, she gained more. She was terribly depressed. And he said, this is more, you're a very bright woman. You're a very accomplished woman. There's something more. There's something under the surface here. And that's how he discovered that she had been a victim of childhood sexual abuse. So, what are the ACEs, the adverse childhood experience, that he linked then with increased adult experiences with cancer, diabetes, heart disease? And what he showed ultimately was that childhood trauma does not go away. It morphs into other forms. Our bodies and our minds are so connected. We talk about this, but this is really a longitudinal study, actually a retrospective study, because this hasn't been done. There are attempts that are now being made to look at children right now during their childhood about how adverse childhood experiences, affect them. But in this retrospective study, he said there are basically 10 adverse childhood experiences. The first is physical abuse. The second is sexual abuse. The third is emotional abuse. The fourth is physical neglect. The fifth is emotional neglect and isolation. We know isolation is a killer. The sixth is mental illness in the family. The seventh is an incarcerated relative, especially if it's the father or the mother. The eighth is the mother treated violently, witness to domestic abuse. The ninth is substance abuse in the family. And the 10th is divorce. Not that all divorces are harmful. They may be hurtful, but there are some. It's like the War of the Roses. And when that divorce, the effects of the divorce goes far beyond the divorce into long-term conflict between the parents, it creates harm in the children. And, ultimately, post-traumatic stress is stress. So again, some of you, this is simplified for purposes of our time together, is there can be 3 levels. And it can have an impact. There has been research done by Dr. Ariel Shalev, Dr. Ari Shalev in Israel, that if the trauma is experienced by a child before speech, so preschool children up to age 3, he's shown there's structural changes in the DNA, the strands of the DNA. How that impacts ultimate development, we don't know. But we do know that the brain operates when there's a threat, that it activates that survival part of our brain, and it dampens the functioning of the other parts, the thinking brain, prefrontal cortex, etc. And that what happens in a persistent state of stress is that especially a child gets stuck in fight, flight, or freeze, and everything that they perceive as a threat, they respond to as a threat, whether or not it reaches the level of what the rest of the classroom or teachers or other adults, even if 99% of the people don't see it as a threat, the child sees it as a threat. If in fact they have had these, not just one adverse childhood experiences, but up to 4 adverse childhood experiences. And so here's reactions: positive, brief increases in the heart. Yeah, what you made tenure. But then what happens is that it gets, okay, now you made tenure, now you better get those grants. It's tolerable because you have other colleagues in that same, that same situation. Then you get the grant. Oh my God, joy. And now you have to implement the grant. Okay, a little challenging, but we only reach a toxic level when there's prolonged stress. And in a child, it may be adverse childhood experiences, but for adults, it may be a combination of a trauma history or a current challenge in our personal lives, in our families, somebody ill, financial challenges because we're helping other people. You know, the sewer line breaks under your house. Your roof needs to be replaced. But I want to say that one thing is not enough to create to be labeled toxic. And I also want to say that toxic stress is not necessarily recognized by all scientists who study trauma, but it is part of a core concept that is not only recognized, but is articulated and disseminated by the Harvard Center for Child Development. And what they say is that toxic stress is not just one event, but the impact of one stress on top of the other until it's the straw that broke the camel's back. So what is resilience? And I want to say that resilience, in some ways, there are genetic components to it. For instance, if you look in your family, if you have people in your family who are like, doomsday, they always see the glass as half full, but maybe you're the person that sees it half empty, or maybe your family in general is just a sort of optimistic group of folks. There are genetic components to that, but also resilience builds on those genetic components. I mean, certainly your intelligence, what you learned, your accomplishments over time, your educational level. These are things that also are part of what you have cultivated, but also it's your experience with confronting an adverse situation and having overcome it. So that's really a big piece as children grow over into adulthood, is even as children to be able to confront something that they perceive as very challenging, but the ability then to overcome it through positive actions, constructive actions, that builds resilience and adds to those genetic components. So each of us has a different level of resilience. And maybe the balance is that, your family wasn't that supportive and you made it on your own, but you made it with the support of other teachers or, somebody outside of your family. And so everybody has different experiences and therefore a different balance of those components. And therefore our baseline is different. So we see that it is a balance. It is the interaction of risk factors in our lives and protective factors, and so too with your students, because there are positive and negative factors that affect all of us, our health, our mental health, our cognition, etc. And what is that balance? And how can we help the individual achieve that balance? We can't fix anything for another person. We can support them. We can be that one person that's a protective factor. But what we're trying to do, especially in institutes of higher learning, is we can't fix any of the things that happen to them. But we can look at their strengths and we can be their support and we can be that encouragement. And we're going to talk a little bit about psychological first aid, one model of psychological first aid, and it is an evidence-informed intervention that you can use as a skill set to help that individual work through their current challenge that is preventing them from learning, preventing them from attending class, preventing them from having positive relationships with their peers and with faculty and with their community. So let's look at resilience factors that emerge and rise to the surface during a crisis. And that is even when we experience something like the Kansas City Chiefs parade, maybe you were one of the million people in the crowd. I don't know if there's a million people in Kansas City, to tell you the truth. Close to that, maybe more. But can you restore that sense of safety? Not that you're being unrealistic or being a Pollyanna, but like, okay, I'm gonna look at how I keep myself, my family safe, and I'm going some warning signs more closely than I did before. The ability to calm oneself, that is huge. So what they say about prognosis in terms of being, we said PTSD, only 27%, God, 27% in our study of children 11 years old who were exposed to violence in the community. But look at the other percent of the majority of students did not rise to clinical levels or experience clinical levels of PTSD. And some of that has to do with the fact that they're able to calm themselves down. So it's not how we react immediately, but do we have that ability to say, okay, it happened, it's scary, I've got to take more actions to make myself safe. Am I able to do that? Is my community able to do that? And also, am I connected to people whose priority is to keep me safe? And do I have hope for the future? So in terms of connectedness, it doesn't have to be a mental health professional. I was called into Oklahoma City after the bombing of the Murrah building by the U.S. Departments of Justice and Education to help the Oklahoma City public schools create a trauma recovery plan. And they asked me to participate in these, what they called group alike, but on ground hearings. So the hearings were held in the schools, in the superintendent's office. And we called together, the superintendent and her executive staff. That was one group. High school principals and middle school principals. That was another group. Elementary principals, one group. Parents. So you get the idea. One of the groups was a group of support staff, custodians, school secretaries, clerical folks. They were all, and we spoke with some of them from the building that was most impacted, because the power of the blast blew right straight into the front of their school, even though it was many, many blocks away, and it shattered the windows, and the bricks fell out. And as I was interviewing them, I asked, how did you deal with this? I mean, my God, I'm used to earthquakes. I can tell if there's an earthquake. There was just an earthquake here in Hawaii. And my son-in-law said, "What is that?" I said, "Oh, that's an earthquake." And it was, it was happened on the Big Island because of the volcanic activity. That's where the lava is still flowing out on the Big Island of Hawaii. And I said, "You don't have earthquakes, so what did you do?" And this lady from the cafeteria said, "You know what? I didn't know what it was. She said, I thought it was a bomb." She had no idea it was the Murrah building. She said, "I ran to the first classroom I could find. And they were little ones. And I gathered as many as I could. I put my arms around them, had them sit next to me, just as close, they were just like body to body. And I said, you don't have to be afraid, because I'm here to take care of you now." And I thought, my God, if I am ever, ever in a crisis, that's the woman I want to take care of me. That care that she considered, that's the foundation, and was really the inspiration I had for creating this model of psychological first aid. Well, I want to do this briefly, but trauma-informed individual and SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, talks about the 4 Rs. So you can read this slide, but I want you to really think about the 4 Rs. And what I hope today that you will take away, and that is, I don't expect faculty to, as I said, fix anything. But my hope would be that you take in and absorb and think about the 4 Rs of trauma. And the first is that you realize how widespread trauma might be. Even if there's no, community-wide bombing or mass shooting, that 30% of the students that are going to come, up to 30%, because your school might be quite different, but up to 30% of the young people coming in to a 4-year college or university is going to require mental health services because of their adverse childhood experiences, or perhaps their current struggles with isolation, loneliness, substance use, any manner of whatever challenges they're facing as young adults. Being able to afford the university, being able to find a safe place to live that's affordable. So the first is to realize how widespread trauma might be. The second is to recognize some of the symptoms that students who are traumatized might have. Can't sleep, can't eat, can't pay attention, really have very low self-esteem. And not that all of that every student who experiences that has trauma in their lives, but that you sort of realize it might be an option here, that you're looking at someone who's has a trauma history. The fourth is that you respond in a way that supports their being able to move forward. And maybe it's, it would be really helpful if you could go to student counseling. Every student can really benefit from that. And then the fourth is not to re-traumatize the student. Because sometimes, and I'll just say, I put my bad mother hat comes on and I'll yell at my kids for something. It's like, come on, you guys, and not realize what the challenge might have been, or what, and not to re-traumatize the individual. So let's go through, this is just an introduction of psychological first aid. And there are other models, but this model, which I created with my colleagues, Dr. Chip Schreiber, Dr. Merritt Schreiber, who was at that time at UCLA, and Dr. Robin Gurwitch, who's now at Duke University, but I worked with her and met her in Oklahoma because she was at OU. We created this together, and it was adopted by Homeland Security, and it is being introduced to you today through the auspices of REMS. So there are 5 steps, and they're really based on teaching people who are not mental health professionals to provide this, because true prevention comes from the people who are around us. True resilience is built by our connectedness with everyday people who care for us, who are on our side. And they probably provided some of these elements of psychological first aid without even knowing it. But we wanted to put together in an evidence-informed way. There's 5 steps. And as I said, there are other models. And I've actually created another model called PFA Teach. But for today, we're going to talk about PFA in general. It was a concept that was created in 1957 by the American Psychiatric Association, and it was meant to restore a sense of safety. And what they discovered back in 1957 is that people who had access to individuals who supported them and provided them with, not just food and water, but with emotional support, and reached out to them, did much better and adjusted more quickly in the aftermath of mass violence and disasters. The second goal is to stabilize the emotions and behaviors of the people who have been through that experience. And the last is, with this improved mental and emotional state, it really supports the mission of education. So this is not therapy. I created this with the whole idea because of the 3 of us, Chip and Robin were functioning already at the university level, but I was functioning as the mental health director and crisis intervention director of LA Unified School District, and had just been trained as a guinea pig by the Secret Service on behavioral threat assessment. But I wanted, the whole objective of this is to return students to the process of learning in the classroom, return them to regular attendance, and to support the process of teaching and learning. So let me go through this quickly. Oh, I know. This is really a great. Could we hold that right there? Okay. So this is really a kind of a diagram about our everyday lives. You know, our baseline isn't the same every day. I mean, there's some Mondays where I wake up and go to work and think, what a great week. I can't hardly wait. And there's some days on Mondays, it's like, could I just have like one more day? So our baseline varies day to day. And then a crisis happens. So we're looking at B to C, and suddenly it plunges me into a state of what's happening here? What should I be doing? And, regardless of how much we have training, so it's easy enough for us to say, this is a crisis. Who's been impacted? And with good training, you could say, okay, this is a group that we triage, just like an emergency room, who needs to be seen first, what might be their signs and symptoms, etc. But for most folks, it's like a sense of helplessness and maybe even hopelessness. If you think about that Chiefs parade, it's like, what the heck? We're seeing people being shot around us. What do we do? And so they're still, in a sense, right now, they're still reeling from the effects of this. They're still talking about it. Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes put out a statement saying that their prayers with everybody, and this should not have happened. So gradually over time, we'll see that this stress, the anxiety, the fear, the terror will subside and will reach another level. Could you click again? And the majority of people will reach a new normal. However, there will be a percentage, anywhere to 30%, that will not reach a new normal. And could we click again? And we're going to talk about not the people. There are a certain percentage, and we don't know what percentage that is. The research is being done now on what's called as post-traumatic growth. And so there's a percentage of folks who, because of the adverse situation, because of their fear and working through the anxiety and pain of a certain situation, actually grow from it and have a stronger sense of self, belief in others, belief in themselves, commitment to their profession, etc. And could we click again? And what I was talking about is that there would be a percentage, 8 to 30%, depending upon the studies and the population of people who would not reach a normal. And they will need treatment. They will need therapy. 8% is within a quote unquote non-military, quote unquote normal civilian population. And 30% in those studies are people who have been deployed more than once to the Middle East. So I'm going to go through this quickly because, as I said, it's an introduction. First step is listen, because people need to be heard. And if you can establish a sense of trust that what they say you're really, truly at heart wanting to know, it has a power in and of itself. The second is protect. And that is, how do you help them achieve a sense of safety? So this is both a physical sense of safety and an emotional sense of safety. So I was called to Newtown after that shooting, and so many children massacred, shredded by these AK-15, shredded. So you can imagine that their sense of safety was in tatters as well. And when I went to the school where the school was resumed, there were state troopers. Then you entered a building. There was like a foyer that had doors on both sides, and you had to present your federal ID. Your name had to be on a list. And then you went into another door and they did a search, of you. And then you entered down the hallway to the principal's office. And there were barriers there. And then you came to the first classroom, and it was filled with 30 therapy dogs, these gorgeous dogs. And in the classrooms, they traveled this gauntlet every day. And there was one teacher who said she wouldn't teach unless her mother was in the classroom. This woman did not feel safe. And that's a whole nother discussion. Should she have been the one to have her mother in the classroom? I mean, doesn't that send a message that all the children there also should have their mothers in the classroom? And I'm not criticizing her. The level of terror that she experienced was beyond anything, was the level of war. Connection. This is part of resilience. The resilience literature says the protective factor is so powerful if you have one person outside your family who believes in you, who's your mentor, your guide, who helps you navigate through bad times, who celebrates you during those joyful times. It's everything. And it's the antidote to isolation and the negative and destructive effects of isolation. And model calm behavior. Because if we see that someone that we admire is able, not that they aren't emotional or angry or upset or fearful or tearful, it's like those are human emotions, but they find a way to say, I don't know what the heck is going on right now, but you know what? Together, we're going to figure this out. So how do we do that? This is one way through psychological first aid that we can promote the ability of that individual to move from that space of survival to thinking about there's people on your side, you are restoring safety, and now it can really allow the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus to come forward and really be at the forefront of operation. That's what we've learned. That's our new model of psychological first aid. It's called TEACH for educators. It really is also based on brain science, so that we show how words, and we use all the research, of course, to show how these models of psychological first aid really make a difference in terms of not only of being not a victim, but a survivor. Okay, we're going to talk about compassion fatigue. And, you know, we have to have resilience ourselves. We have to have colleagues or someone, a friend, or someone maybe in our family, when we can go and say, gosh, you'll never believe what I just went through, and to be able to share that, to have that connectedness. We won't be able to go through all of these different concepts because they are very distinct concepts. I just want to note that occupational burnout, that burnout in and of itself has been recognized as an official syndrome by the World Health Organization, that you can really be burned out from your job. I think I might have felt that as a parent when my kids were adolescents, but in my job, I've always just been so grateful that I have this profession, that I have this life's work. But let's just focus on compassion fatigue. And I think we might have to end with this because it's 9 o'clock. So when you are immersed in both community aspects of perhaps trauma, as well as your talks with students, is that we can have signs and symptoms of not only compassion fatigue, but a secondary trauma. And that is that physically, we just feel spent. That emotionally, we can have just a roller coaster of emotions, and maybe we can just be more angry than we should be. that behaviorally we begin to change. And I want to say, I hit that comfort food hard when I'm stressed out. And it's not a good thing necessarily, but I mean, I don't drink, and that's only because I'm allergic to alcohol, because I actually like the way it tastes. That cognitively we're preoccupied with things. Interpersonally can have an impact because, maybe we're yelling at our puppy that we love, or we just overreact to things that usually wouldn't affect us at all. That spiritually, people have asked the question, why would God let this happen? There can be spiritual crisis, and that occupationally, we can have, we're just not 100%. That. And self-care, here's all the ways we need to take care of ourselves. And I want to just put financial, we talked about the others, but financial health is so, so important. What keeps us from it? Oh, I'm too busy, I don't have any, I walk, but I don't have anybody to walk with. Like, find somebody. And you may not even realize it. I remember I spoke at a university of the Philippines after one of the typhoons, and I talked about compassion fatigue. And I thought, there's something wrong. They looked mad at me. And at the end of I just kept on, we have those lectures where we got to keep going because maybe they're all sleeping, but they're listening. And they came up to me afterwards and said, I thought I was going crazy. I didn't know that's what it was. That's exactly how I felt. So make a decision, commit yourself to it, and you will succeed. So these are the 4 components: your culture, adults, young adults, still dealing with adolescent issues, maybe. Introduction to psychological first aid as a skill set. 3 dimensions of compassion fatigue. You can't, what was that slide? If we were walking through water, you cannot expect to stay dry. If you are walking through trauma, you cannot expect not to be affected, and build that plan. Okay. I've got to stop. When I get stressed out, I got to stop driving through Popeyes, because I can't tell you how good I feel when I get that 3-piece. If you have questions, please, you can write to REMS. And last, I think, is do we have a last slide? Yes, there you go. And I don't know, Amanda, did you want to speak to this slide? This is our last slide.
Thank you so much, Marleen. This was a really excellent presentation. And I just wanted to say briefly, if you do have any questions or you are looking for the slide deck and additional information, we do offer this presentation in a much longer format and even in person. Feel free to contact us using the information on the screen. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending.
Aloha, everybody.
If we have time, we can take 1 or 2 questions. So we can do a little over. We do the traditional model where an academic quarter over isn't late. So we technically therefore have 10 minutes, but we do not have to exploit that. But Marleen, I don't know if you would be available to answer questions if anything comes up.
Happy to.
Wonderful.
I defer to Amanda, because this is her
Okay.
Zoom.
Yeah.
And I don't know if
Absolutely.
there are other meetings that she has to go to.
No, absolutely. I'm here.
Okay.
Wonderful. So, and I would also like to thank REMS and with that, the US Department of Education for the support and for making this possible. This is really very important to us, so we appreciate that. One thing from Shelley Johnson, a colleague here at Embry-Riddle, I picked up in the chat, and Shelley says, I wonder how much the pandemic and isolation that occurred has added to the mental health problems with our younger generation.
Yes, no doubt. And they say that there's so many challenges that this current generation has faced that the faculty generation has not faced. I've heard it said that social media's it's really isolation media. And that the students that are entering now have grown up with this practice of being on their social media. And whereas their faculty may not have at all. So over the last 10 to 15 years, especially when not just Facebook, but MySpace came out, they estimated across the United States and the world that about 3 million people knew about social media and were engaged in it. And now they're saying 4 billion people are engaged in social media and have access to everybody on Earth. 4 billion, that's half the people on this Earth right now. And so social media and the internet and all those things, they have the power for good, but they also have the power for destruction. And especially the younger the student, the more negative the impact in terms of, bullying and people having the influence of saying, you should kill yourself, you're not worth it, you're ugly. And that all of those things that relate to bullying, I'm just looking at this, like belittling them, rejecting them, ridiculing them, blaming them for things that people that they don't even know, threatening them, isolating, you aren't fit to be in your school, you should just stay at home. Just purposely being hurtful, all of these influences and what's happening in our society, for a sports person on first take to say it's part of our country. We've got to find a way to make sure that people who shouldn't have guns don't have guns. My family had guns, they were gun owners, but what's happening and there was a cabinet, but gun safety, gun use, and also if we can license people to drive, we can license people to use guns. I don't know if that answers the question.
Thank you, Marleen. Now, also, this was a very insightful, powerful presentation and very important to us, as I mentioned. And also, if you didn't know, our Embry-Riddle Worldwide College of Arts and Sciences is proud to be the general education provider for all students at our worldwide campus. So we have basically now over 20,000 students go through us.
Wow.
Yeah, this is big. This is a huge responsibility for us. This is also something that connects to our own faculty research. We have an own department for security and emergency services, but this outreach is important. I did that also earlier in my career. So campus resilience is a very important topic to me, and then the psychological and individual and aspect to it. Very, very important, very insightful. So I wanted to once again thank REMS for letting us invite you, and then also Amanda for being here to represent REMS. Very important. So any final questions or comments? Just watching out. And we will also make the recording, if that's fine. We will make the recording available. Brianna will edit it, and then we'll post it, and we'll also make sure that attendees are being informed as soon as it is available. Maybe we can do one last question here, if you don't mind.
Oh, not at all.
Wonderful. So this comes from Kristen Gibson, and she says, I'm attending NTAS next week. It's a conference on our Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University Daytona campus that is focusing on prioritizing mental health in aviation. Big thing, big conference, great event. We are looking forward to that. Thanks, Kristen, for pointing that out. Question from Kristen for you. Do you have any recommendations what we could potentially bring up to the FAA to support a more preventative approach? I know that transcends schools and higher education. So,
Yeah.
but you are the expert in the room here. So therefore, maybe.
Well, I think that's an excellent question because, the university can be very also a lonely experience for some students just because they don't connect with other people. And I would say to really strengthen those programs that are offered to students, at USC, we have a very strong spiritual and religious center, and they also provide other classes like mindfulness. It can be not religious, it can be general spiritual things, but it brings people together in a more informal way. They may not know each other, but they provide environments in which they can meet new people. We also have, student life where they create, they try to create more outreach to students and provide them with non-mental health connections. They bring together just interest groups. Those are always good. But there needs to be more outreach because, in K-12 schools, they operate under the ancient the ancient sort of policy of in loco parentis. And what that means is in place of the parents in K-12, the teachers, the faculty, the staff act in place of the parents. They are responsible for their safety, their well-being. That's not true in university. In university, there are faculty and folks in power who say, these are adults and they've got to figure it out themselves. You can refer them to someplace, and I'm just going to say we have to rethink that and other ways of reaching out to students and also just asking, how are you doing? And being that person that is encouraging, whether or not it is the classroom or on campus, if we see them, just even saying hello and acknowledging their very, presence. So just think about ways in which we can have small groups on campus, interest groups, all variety of activities that we reach out and we bring in students, where they can find a place to be with others.
And I can correct myself also because apparently, obviously, we are Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, and of course there is a connection between FAA Federal Aviation Administration concerns about safety in aviation and us, because we are the aeronautical university, the number one, not only in the country but in the world. We are convinced we are, and second, we train the aviation and aeronautical and aerospace workforce that includes pilots and others. So obviously there is although it's not higher education or school safety per se, but obviously we train that workforce, and then if we are able, with using the resources that REMS and others and expertise like Marleen is kindly offering to offer to our aviation students, that will translate itself into the aviation sector proper. So there apparently is, there obviously is a connection. I just wanted to point that out. So this is really very important to us, and we hope we can continue that. So, but for the time being, thank you so much. If you don't know us yet, at the Embry-Riddle Worldwide College of Arts and Sciences, here is a link if you'd like to get to know us a little better. And we will be back as soon as we have the recording edited. And we look forward to talking to you all soon again in the future. And thank you so much, Marleen. And thanks, Amanda, for being so receptive to our speaker request and so supportive. Really appreciate that. So thanks all. Be safe, be good, and see you again soon, I hope. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.